Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. Incredibly strange presenter doing their best to talk about music each and every week, right? So, in today's episode, as you no doubt probably already know, we're returning to the world of Swans once again with a look at the live album counterpart to the very strange, almost controversially in context of Swans' output, album The Burning World, of course. So, this particular album, I'm actually kind of interested to discuss because it's a bit of an oddity, I would say. It's one that I don't think gets mentioned all that much in terms of anything the band's released, and it's it's very much arguably overshadowed by the extensive discography by the band. And although it presents some of the songs from the era, in a very interesting way, I don't know. I think there's something lacking in this one, but we'll get into that later. Still, there is a bunch of interesting points to talk about on this album, so let's discuss it today. Today, I present Anonymous Bodies in an Empty Room by Swans. So, normally this is where we ask ourselves, who were Swans? However, I'll be honest, I'm really not sure because there's no real credits for this very album. Looking at the pictures of the album available, Anonymous Bodies in an Empty Room is perhaps one of the most stark and minimal presentations of a Swans album in perhaps their entire discography, it feels. Basic black background, minimal text informing us of the title, album's title, and the track listing, and very little else, truth be told. Very peculiar. Especially from now having read or currently reading through "Sacrifice and Transcendence: The Oral History of Swans" by Nick Soulsby. This current era of Swans sort of saw a lot of turmoil in the band's lineup, especially with Michael Gira's relationship to the various drummers. He was very horrible to a bunch of them, it seems. But in any case, though, with it being sort of like this tumultuous time, you'd think that they would have perhaps credited who was on this particular release, but apparently not. So, if you happen to have any idea who was on in any of these particular performances, let us know in the comments. So, anyway, let's crack on with the review. What is Anonymous Bodies in an Empty Room? Well, it is the third live album from Swans, released in 1990, containing recordings from the Burning World tour between the years of 1988 to 89. And from my understanding, a bit of an overlooked album within Swans' discography, and although it is one that actually showcases to us how the songs from the Burning World should have sounded, arguably. As well, also from my understanding, Anonymous Bodies is another, bootleg-made official type recording, very much in the same vein as the previous two Swans live albums we've already looked at. However, with that in mind, though, I think there's been a significant drop in quality on this one, though. This album, it feels a bit difficult to listen to purely from just how the recording of the album sounds, which is kind of a shame, because I want to hear how these songs from the Burning World should have sounded. But irrespective of that, though, it does remain a document of Swans' current place and time at that time, if that makes sense. So let's crack on with the song, shall we? So Anonymous Bodies in an Empty Room opens up with the live rendition of Let It Come Down. And so a little tiny point to mention, I find it interesting how in our video for the previous episode of Swans, I mentioned how I felt Let It Come Down would be a much more interesting album opener than the opener of The River That Runs Won't Run Dry on The Burning World. And I have to say, hearing Let It Come Down open up Anonymous Bodies, it creates that exact mood setter that I was looking for in The Burning World. It's got that sinister, nasty, angular edge to it, making it an intimidating experience, that fills you with this foreboding anxiety. And to be fair as well, just to mention it again, I think it sounds a lot better than the treatment Bill Laswell gave it, in his production, in my opinion. I just like that sort of grumpier, nastier edge to it. However, it does suffer a lot from that quality, that quality you get from, semi-official bootlegs like this, the whole mix, not just on this one, but the whole album, everything's kind of watery and hazy, especially when it comes to the vocal performances, which is a shame, but what can we do? But regardless of such, I feel as though we can hear a bit more clearly how the song was supposed to sound. There's a lovely build-up within the track that explodes with that final call of Let It Come Down before you get that swirling miasma of vocal drones in amongst that gothic rock aesthetic. And thus, I think it's a brilliant opener to the album, one that highlights those nastier edges that were seemingly prevalent in the songs on The Burning World, but sadly lost within that production, of course. And it even effortlessly extends its runtime nicely on this one, I have to say as well. Perhaps one of my favourite songs from The Burning World, so I have to say I really enjoy how it's opened up the album for us on this one. So from here we move on to a very interesting track, a live rendition of Blood on Your Hands, which was sourced from the World of Skins album Blood, Women, Roses. So this song is, from what I understand, a popular Jarbo-led ballad featuring wonderful vocal performances that climb and soar in amongst the droning keyboard performances. Something very powerful, very intense, about this performance, and it's a fine presentation of Jarbo's capabilities, as both a vocal performer, in my eyes, something that was, ever so slightly hinted at on the inclusion of Can't Find My Way Home from The Burning World, of course. And it feels like Blood in Your Hands, it kind of captures that sort of, it's a bit of a weird point to make, but I feel like it kind of captures that kind of classic rock sentiment, that the Blind Faith cover also tried to capture some of, if that makes sense, It's just interesting, that sort of big commanding vocal performance kind of thing. I think though as well, placed here as the second track, it works well in favour of this album though, as it helps to bring a sort of calm, following on from the intimidation of Let It Come Down, as well as suggesting to us as listeners that this is gonna be a somewhat of an unusual Swans album of sorts. And speaking of, the next track, titled Untitled Excerpt, but also known as A Young Girl Needs More, it further pushes this slightly unusual aesthetic of this album experience. And so from what I can gather, this track only appeared in live form during the tour for The Burning World. And on this particular live album, we're only given the second half of it. And what we have is a sort of weird cataclysmic overload of instruments as Jira just kind of wails over the top of it all, creating such a tumultuous aesthetic that lasts, a little over 2.5 minutes. Something quite novel about it, but it's one of those things where I can't help but wonder what happened to the rest of the song. Perhaps simply the quality just was insufficient for this bootleg release of sorts, but who knows, it could be anything. Any case, certainly interesting though. Following on from this though, we get the next track of Will We Survive, a track which we haven't covered yet on Weird Music, as it will get its official release on the next Swans episode, the 1991 release of White Light from the Mouth of Infinity. So, I think, on this entire album, this might be one of my favourites, there's something very energetic and very passionate about how this one all comes together, and such a terrific pacing to the entire thing, which feels like it's just flying over the hills, through the clouds as the sun blinds you overhead. And with its use of acoustic instrumentation, backed up by ferocious drumming and the dark twangs of the electric guitar, provided by Norman Westberg, I would assume, of course, it feels like a proper version of the kinds of things that Swans were maybe hoping to do on The Burning World. And maybe this is perhaps why it's been prominently featured on this particular album. A song that the band were, probably incredibly proud of, and one that showcased their place and time better than what their current studio album was perhaps expressing to people, I feel. If that makes any sense of it. I don't know. Maybe anyway. Just pure speculation. In any case though, it's a definite highlight on this live album though. It's for an album that's arguably lacking in some respects, it's certainly evident that it's not a completely duff and redundant release by any means, don't get me wrong. Still lots to be enjoyed, that of course, we all enjoy in our own different ways, of course, And and in fairness though, is it better than the studio version? Probably not, but it's still a highlight on this particular album in my books anyway. And so moving along, we get the next track of See No More. Another track from The Burning World, of course, being presented to us in live context, so hearing it properly it feels. And this one I find interesting for a couple of reasons. In context of this performance, the whole thing has so much of a rough, nastier edge to it than what was on the official album release, of course. And maybe this is in part to the audio quality, which admittedly isn't great, as we have mentioned, but even so, you can still feel where this song is meant to be headed. Especially with that electric guitar riff though, which has so much more of those angular edges to it. And punching with each smash of the drum, before it all subsides in these weirdly gentle interludes before Jira just croons away with the vocals for the verses. And in my opinion, I just really enjoy it when the song reaches its climax though, as you get such an intense flurry of instrumentals from the band, especially with that consistent militant beat, just pounding away, pushing it all along with this wonderful intensity. I would say it arguably takes a little while to get there, truth be told, but it creates for a wonderful moment, I feel, something that feels unusually intense and very foreboding. From here though, we get another interesting addition to the track listing, a live rendition of Still a Child, another Jarbo-led ballad of sorts that's been sourced from the World of Skin album Blood, Wood and Roses again. And so this one, generally speaking, mostly dominated from this rather muddy sounding acoustic guitar performance as Jarbo just sings with this amazing presence once again. And there's that intensity that we've been getting in a lot of these performances, I feel, as well as that dark foreboding nature that makes the whole thing feel so uncomfortable, but in that weird satisfying Swans way, of course. Weirdly enough, I think this is one of those odd instances where the performance benefits from the muddy recording style that we've actually got on this one, especially with it just being the guitar and, Jarbo's vocals. The entire thing just fills up with this natural reverberance that the room offers from wherever it was they recorded it, of course. And it gives the whole thing this semi-lo-fi quality, but I think it works in benefit of this particular track for some reason. Especially with Jarbo, so effortlessly dominating the recording with that wonderful vocal performance. It makes it, an incredibly interesting track on this album, I have to say. Moving swiftly along though, we get the live rendition of She's a Universal Emptiness, from The Burning World, of course. And so I remember when discussing this on The Burning World, how lyrically the song's quite interesting, but instrumentally I didn't think it was all that great. And so for this live rendition, we get a little bit more grit from time to time, especially following on from each iteration of the chorus. The entire band seems to be rushing forward with, that momentary flurry of chaotic noise before bringing it back down to earth for the following verses. And it gives the song a much more interesting dynamic than what we were given on The Burning World. But I have to be honest, I think after now hearing it in the live context and hearing it on the original album as well, I don't know if this is a song I rate by Swans all that much for some reason. And I was hoping by diving into the live version of these songs by The Burning World, we'd have a much more clear idea of how these songs should be presented. Certainly the more intense moments on this track certainly elevated up much more than Laswell's production did, I feel, which is of course just my opinion. But I don't know, there's just something about this particular song that just doesn't feel all that interesting to me for some reason. Rather controversial perhaps, but I just think it's a little bit forgettable, and one that just, for me, just doesn't stand out enough to me, I feel, which is maybe a bit unfair, but of course, just my personal opinion. I have to say, certainly coming into this entire deep dive of Swans, however long it's going to take and all that lot, we're definitely going to be coming across songs that I just don't like all that much. But I still find them interesting nonetheless. And even why I don't find it interesting is kind of interesting, because we all feel and like things for different reasons, we all dislike things for different reasons. There's so many songs that I adore by Swans that you probably hate as well, which is absolutely fine. In any case, with Swans having such a varied discography, everyone's bound to have those different opinions, and that's something I like about Swans as a whole, if that makes any sense. In any case, ramble over, we have one final track to close off this album, and that is the live rendition of Miracle of Love, a song we will also see on the following studio album of White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, of course. And so when it comes to that album, Miracle of Love, one of my favourite tracks on the whole thing, amongst a whole host of others, I have to say. And it's certainly interesting hearing part of the genesis for the track on this particular live album, with it, which, to be fair, still carries that very murk, dark and sinister edge. And I enjoy the rather subtle build-up that the performance gives us here, though, especially with the electric guitar hiding in the background, it feels, suggesting at the menace that will be arriving soon within this composition. And it arrives in the form of this rather cataclysmic extended outro of sorts, one that seems to further push that intensity and that macabre nature that's been running out through a lot of the performances on this live album, of course. And interestingly, I don't know about you personally, but I feel like here's another one of those minor little suggestions for the future of Swans music, in this performance, You're getting that intense crunching of singular chords with ever so slight key changes, as well as what kind of feels like the early versions of what we'd see from the band during the Trilogy years. Just that chug, chug, chug kind of thing, if that's one way to describe it. It might just be me, but certainly when going through the plethora of albums by Swans, there's just little bits here and there I'm starting to notice that seem to stand out in this context, stuff we will later see them develop in a much greater way in the later albums, of course, if that makes any sense, of course. To get back to it, though, to get back to Miracle of Love here, I think this is a fine way to end the live album, though. Like I said, one of the best songs from White Light, the Mouth of Infinity, and there's a wonderfulness to the performance that Jira gives when he sings this one, of course. Such that menacing croon and the wonderful instrumentals, showcasing the darkness of that gothic rock era, But as well, I feel like this one is hinting at things to come in the following years, and I think that's kind of cool. And so with that, we've essentially covered Anonymous Bodies in an Empty Room by Swans. So personally, I'm not sure if I rate this album all that much, The songs are fine, the performances are fine, sure enough, but I think it's the quality, of the recordings themselves. It feels like so much of the clarity is being lost, giving the entire set this really odd, muddy quality. And maybe it's just me being too fussy, perhaps, but it's just how I feel, so thought I'd mention it. But a point to mention as well, with consideration of the previous Swans live albums, those themselves sourced from live lo-fi bootlegs as well, especially Public Castration is a good idea, one of the most famous of Swans live albums, recorded through bootleg, really bare minimum bootleg means, of course, and yet still sounds better than this album, I think, for some reason. In any case, it's just weird to me that this one kind of misses the mark. Maybe it's due to the style, This era of Swans, it sees the band opting for much more refined palettes in terms of their sound, and having a lot of that refinement missing through the use of how they recorded it, it just detracts from the true brilliance that this type of record could offer, in my opinion. In any case, though, there's still certainly a lot of very interesting qualities to Anonymous Bodies in an Empty Room, It's interesting how the track list has been sourced from a number of different records, spanning different projects that Jira and Jarbo were experimenting with, from World of Skin to Future Swans records, etc. And yet there is still a sense of that cohesion within the track listing itself, Everything seems to present that sort of rather dark, macabre, gothic rock style of sorts, showcasing to us the evolution of the band, from those atonal dirges in the early 80s. They've certainly come a long way. And it's remarkable to see such an effortless evolution within their style of music, and yet within that, still retaining that nasty, angular edge from time to time, of course. But to go back to it, I just don't rate this particular album all that much within Swans discography personally. It's a weird thing, because as grand as parts of this record are, I just don't see it being one I'd return to all that much, if ever, truth be told. And it's certainly an interesting documentation of the band's evolution of sound, I would argue, as well as showcasing how they were sounding in those live contexts in that current time during the years it was recorded, of course. But beyond that, I don't know. It's one of those records that doesn't communicate to me all that much, and even the presentation of it, just bare bones, black, minimalist designs. I don't know if it works for Swans as a band, and you know, just not one that I'd rank as my favourite. Regardless of that though, I'm definitely glad to have checked it out nonetheless, because it certainly gives a lot of context for the Burning World, for the songs of the Burning World, and how they should sound. So with that, I think we'll be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music then. Another oddity within the Swans discography, no doubt, but certainly interesting within its own right, I would argue. And like mentioned, I have to say it's certainly nice to hear tracks from the Burning World presented with the, that nastier sound that was completely missing on that album, that Swans aesthetic essentially. And there's certainly much more intensity and ferocity in how the band seem to play the songs, which certainly works well, I would say. Beyond that, not a favourite of mine though. Probably in due to the audio quality, it's just hard for me to get past, It is what it is. I have to say, I'd be interested in knowing what you think of this particular record though. If you disagree with my in-name comments, then by all means, you're more than welcome to. This is just, differing individuals, differing opinions, of course, And I think it's worth hearing everyone's varying opinions in mind. In any case, huge thanks for you two for watching this episode of Weird Music. In our next episode on Swans, we'll of course be diving into what is actually a favourite of mine, White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, of course. Should certainly be interesting to dive into. I hope it doesn't take too long to write, but we'll see. In any case with that, I wish you all the best. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.